Hello there. I'm back. It's been a little while again. Apologies for that. If you were waiting around for the next reading of the landmark Thucydides, because I left off last time paragraph 9, 1 9. And I think at the end of that, it was about mostly Agamemnon. And Thucydides stating that Agamemnon had the largest navy in the ancient world and that he started navies. I don't know about that, and I didn't see anything that when I tried to look it up in the time since the last video that showed he started the first ancient navy. I would think somebody had it before him, but maybe he had the largest. But that's where we left off in Thucydides' description of the ancient Greek world. So I'm just going to jump right into it. We're going to do paragraph 1.10. These are bigger paragraphs, so I'll see if I can do maybe two, three of them, and we'll read through them, see what they say. As usual, I'll drop off my random, non academic thoughts on them, just opinions or wonderings about things and what he wrote. Try to glean some information about this, and we learn more about Thucydides, ancient Greek world, and all the islands, and work our way towards the Peloponnesian War. So, if you're ready, let's go. Paragraph 10. And from this expedition, we may infer the character of earlier enterprises. Now, Mycenae may have been a small place, and many of the cities of that age may appear comparatively insignificant, but no exact observer would therefore feel justified in rejecting the estimate given by the poets and by tradition of the magnitude of the armament. So, I guess small locale, but large military. For I suppose that if Sparta were to become desolate, and only the temples and the foundations of the public buildings were left, that as time went on there would be a strong disposition with posterity to refuse to accept her fame as a true exponent of her power. And yet they occupy two-fifths of the Peloponnesus, and lead the whole, not to speak of their numerous allies outside. Still, as the city is neither built in a compact form nor adorned with magnificent temples and public edifices, but composed of villages as after the old fashion of Hellas, there would be an impression of inadequacy. Whereas if Athens were to suffer the same misfortune, I suppose that any inference from the appearance presented to the eye would make her power to have been twice as great as it is. We have therefore no right to be skeptical, nor to content ourselves with an inspection of a city without considering its power. But we may safely conclude that the armament in question surpassed all before it, just as it fell short of modern efforts. If we can here also accept the testimony of Homer's poets, in which, without allowing for the exaggeration which a poet would feel himself in license to employ, we can see that it was far from equaling ours. And we're name dropping Homer, just in case anybody's wondering if Homer was a thing in the ancient world, because he comes 400 years or so before Thucydides. You can see that they are hanging on his words as well. He has represented it as consisting of 1,200 vessels, the Boeotian complement of each ship being 120 men, that of the ships of Philoctetes 50. By this I conceive he meant to convey the maximum and the minimum complement. At any rate, he does not specify the amount of any others in his catalogue of the ships. That they were all rowers as well as warriors we see from his account of the ships of Philoctetes, in which all the men at the oar are bowmen. Well, I mean, both take arm strength, so that would make sense if you want to get somebody to do double duty. Being an archer and an oar rower would be the thing. Now, it is improbable that many who were not members of the crew sailed by officers, especially as they had to cross the open sea with munitions of war, in ships, moreover, that had no decks, but were equipped in the old piratical fashion. Okay. So that if we strike the average of the largest and smallest ships, the number of those who sailed will appear inconsiderable, representing as they did the whole force of Hellas. So, paragraph 11. And this was due not so much to scarcity of men as of money. Difficulty of subsistence made the invaders reduce the numbers of the army to a point at which it might live on the country during the prosecution of the war. Even after the victory they obtained on their arrival, and the victory there must have been, or the fortifications of the naval camp could never have been built. There was no indication of the whole force having been employed. On the contrary, they seem to have turned to cultivation of the Chersonese and to piracy from want of supplies. This was what really enabled the Trojans to keep the field for 10 years against them, the dispersion of the enemy making them always a match for the detachment left behind. If they had brought plenty of supplies with them and had persevered in the war without scattering for piracy and agriculture, they would have easily defeated the Trojans in the field, since they could hold their own against them with a division of service, on service. In short, if they had stuck to the siege, the capture of Troy would have cost them less time and less trouble. But as one of money proved the weakness of earlier expeditions, so from the same cause even the one in question, more famous than its predecessors, may be pronounced on the evidence of what it accomplished to have been inferior to its renown, and to the current opinion about it formed under the tuition of the poets. That hungering of forces waiting for agriculture, having to stop to actually grow crops, that's months, um, or go into piracy to get supplies. Um, the sad part about that is that this is built on the back of money, war. And to this day, even, you can find examples of this um, in the modern era. If you go back to like Joseph Plum Martin's account of the American Revolution, if anyone's read that, it's a really good book. He kept notes throughout the whole time he was marching in that war and how he was constantly hungry and having to dip out of the forces to go into the woods to get supplies. Um, Sometimes to hunt, sometimes to steal. And I don't think there's a war where you don't have stories about this. So that's something ancient that still sadly goes into modern times. Um, but there we are. War is hell, war is trash. So Athens and Sparta are going to go at it at some point in this book. So I'm looking forward to how that happens and how it goes. But for right now, we're on more build up. So, paragraph 1.12. Even after the Trojan War, Hellas was still engaged in removing and settling, and thus could not attain to the quiet which must precede growth. The late return of the Hellenes from Ilium caused many revolutions, and factions ensued almost everywhere. And it was the citizens thus driven in exile who founded the cities. 60 years after the capture of Ilium, the modern Boeotians were driven out of Arne by the Thessalians, and the Mar- and the and settled in the present Boeotia, the former Cadmean land. Though there was a division of them there before, some of whom joined the expedition to Ilium. 20 years later, the Dorians and the Heraclids were people who claimed to be the descendants of the children of Heracles, became masters of the Peloponnesus, so that much had to be done, and many years had to elapse before Hellas could attain to a durable tranquility undisturbed by removals, and could begin to send out colonies, as Athens did to Ionia, and most of the islands and the Peloponnesians to most of Italy and Sicily, and some places in the rest of Hellas. All these places were founded subsequently to the war with Troy. And this, the immediate thing that comes to my mind, it's been a while since I've really read it, but I've been listening to an audiobook called Vanquished. Um, and it's about the inter period between World War One and all the upheavals that happened in a lot of other countries in Europe and the Middle East and Russia and so on after the Great War. And this just reminds me of the upheavals and changes in like what used to be Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and Germany. And all of this just sounds like that sort of same thing. After a war, things are never the same again. And even when you go home, home isn't what you think it's going to be anymore because people want change. And they've now had the taste of battle, so they're not afraid to fight for it now. I'm not sure, trying to say that there's an exact lineup by far with this ancient war and World War One and what happened afterwards. I'm just saying that's the first thing that came to my mind, and I see some parallels. Paragraph 1.13. But as the power of Hellas grew and the acquisition of wealth became more an objective, the revenues of the states increasing, tyrannies were established almost everywhere. the old form of government being hereditary monarchy with definitive prerogatives, and Hellas began to fit out fleets and apply herself more closely to the sea. It is said that the Corinthians were the first to approach the modern style of naval architecture, and that Corinth was the first place in Hellas where triremes were built. Huh. And now that is the like common trade and especially warship in the Greeks and later the Romans. Beautiful style ship. Love seeing them. And we have Ameinocles, a Corinthian shipwright, making four ships for the Samians. Dating from the end of this war, it is nearly 300 years ago that Ameinocles went to Samos. Again, the earliest sea fight in history was between the Corinthians and the Corcyraeans. This was about 260 years ago, dating from the same time. Yeah, that's got to be like the first battle for the Greeks at sea. That's no way, because the Egyptians and other peoples had to come way before that, I would think. But again, he's telling the history, and his history is about the ancient Greek world, so it fits. Planted on an isthmus, Corinth has always been a commercial emporium, as formerly almost all communication between the Hellenes within and without the Peloponnesus was carried on over land, and the Corinthian territory was the highway through which it traveled. She had consequently great money resources, as is shown by the epithet wealthy bestowed by the old poets on the place, and this enabled her, when traffic by sea became more common, to procure her navy and put down piracy. And as she could offer a market for both branches of the trade, she acquired for herself all the power which a large revenue affords. Subsequently, the Ionians attained to great naval strength in the reign of Cyrus, the first king of the Persians, and his son Cambyses. And while they were at war with the former, commanded for a while the seas around Ionia. Polycrates, also the tyrant of Samos, had a powerful navy in the reign of Cambyses, with which he reduced many of the islands, and among them Rhenia, which he consecrated to the Delian Apollo. About this time, also the Phocaeans, while they were founding Marseille, defeated the Carthaginians in a sea fight. 1.14. These were the most powerful navies, and even these, although so many generations had elapsed since the Trojan War, seem to have been principally composed of the old 50 oars and longboats, and to have counted few triremes among their ranks. Indeed, it was only shortly before the Persian War and the death of Darius, the successor of Cambyses, that the Sicilian tyrants and the Corcyraeans acquired any large number of triremes. For after these there were no navies of any account in Hellas till the expedition of Xerxes. Aegina, Athens, and others may have possessed a few vessels, but they were principally 50 oars. It was quite at the end of this period that the war with Aegina and the prospect of the barbarian invasion enabled Themistocles to persuade the Athenians to build the fleet with which they fought at Salamis. And even these vessels had not complete decks. Okay? 1.15. And I think this will be the last one for this video. The navies then of the Hellenes during the period we have traversed were what I have described. All their insignificance did not prevent their being an element of the greatest power to those who cultivated them, alike in revenue and in dominion. They were the means by which the islands were reached and reduced, those of the smallest area falling the easiest prey. Wars by land there were none, none at least by which power was acquired. We have the usual border contests, but of distant expeditions, with conquest the object we hear nothing among the Hellenes. There was no union of subject cities round a great state, no spontaneous combination of equals for confederate expeditions. What fighting there was consisted merely of local warfare between rival neighbors. The nearest approach to a coalition took place in the old war between Chalkis and Eretria. This was a quarrel in which the rest of the Hellenic world did to some extent take sides. Now, I wonder what that war was called and when it actually took place and how that went. I might have to look that up. All right, well, that was paragraphs 1.10 to 1.15. That's 5 paragraphs, pretty good haul. And we've got an overall view of now not just the Greek world, but a few of conflicts, the lack of wars, or big ones anyway, um, the reliance on money to wage those wars, and the evolution, sort of, at least somewhat evolution, of warships going from no deck 50 oar vessels to eventually the famous trireme of the ancient Greek warriors and later the Romans. So I'm loving how Thucydides has set this up. He's given a nice ample play of how the entire area worked conflict wise, government wise, so the political, military, land and mostly sea of the world and how it built up from the time of the Trojan War up to his generation. And that's great. I know, some people, his history, supposedly from what I heard, is some of it's some of it's on point. But so far, I'm very early in and I'm loving what I'm reading. And I can't wait to do the next video and find out what it is because, as I told you before, I don't jump ahead to this. I let this book sit until it's time to do the next video. So I am completely surprised by anything I'm reading. I have no idea what it is. I will see if I can look up that Chalkis and Eritrea War, though. Um, and I'll see if I can post maybe a short on triremes as well. Find something on those older 50 oar boats, too. And if I do, I'll drop some shorts about them. So keep an eye out. But once again, thank you for stopping by, for listening to any portion of this video. If you like it, subscribe because I'll be reading this for a considerable length of time. So, thank you very much. I hope you all have a good one. Stay safe out there and learn your history.